Hello and welcome everybody. My name is Zach Nelson. I'm the team lead of the Threat Operations Center for the Health-ISAC. Today I have the pleasure of introducing you to not only John Riggi, who works for the American Hospital Association and had over 30 years of a decorative service for the FBI, along with Brad Regeski of the Health-ISAC Threat Operations Center as well. First and foremost, I'd like to thank all of you for joining today. I know it's been a long couple of days, and we appreciate you being here this last event, I believe it is. So today what we were going to talk about is preparing for the next SolarWinds event. Back in, I believe it was April, Health-ISAC and the American Hospital Association got together and decided it would be great to do a collaborative white paper that not only Brad Regeski and John Riggi, along with some of the Health-ISAC analysts worked on. And we just want to go over the past, present, and future of potential SolarWinds types of events and how we can maybe threat cast and predict what the next event will be. So as of right now, I'll go ahead and hand it over to John. John, over to you, sir.
Great. Thank you, Zach, and good afternoon, everybody. Could I have the next slide, please? So as Zach was, could you go to the next slide? Thanks. So as Zach was mentioning, I personally had the pleasure to work with my good friends and colleagues over at the HISAC previously when I was at the FBI, great organization and critical platform for information sharing. So post SolarWinds, I was literally sitting around one day thinking about, you know, this massive intelligence gathering operation, because that's what it was. It was an amazingly and quite frankly successful intelligence operation, intelligence espionage operation by the Russian intelligence services, targeting multiple sectors of our economy, actually penetrating most of the Fortune 500 companies and quite a few healthcare entities. We understood, as I was sitting there thinking, what were the characteristics of this attack and the impact so broad, and how did we all miss this in a sense? But then I was thinking a little bit further and understood that really this isn't something new. Those of us that follow cybersecurity trends and practices, the tactics and techniques, procedures of the adversary, understood that actually this is a deployment of some old tactics, the compromise of a legitimate update and used in a new environment. And based on my background, not only at the FBI, but I also served as a representative to CIA on counterterrorism issues, and also very familiar with how intelligence operations run. So there I was thinking that if a hostile foreign intelligence agency has developed a methodology to successfully penetrate some key infrastructure via technology, would they really only rely on one channel? Would they only rely on the successful penetration of SolarWinds? Or would they, as in most common intelligence operations, use that same tactic to maintain multiple channels, multiple avenues of access? Very standard, really, in intelligence operations. And then that really got me thinking that I should call my good friends over at the HISAC and rely on some of their technical experts, such as Brad, to see if this theory could flesh out and what else is out there that we could examine. So again, one of the most widespread technical espionage operations in history, not only impacting private sector, but also impacting government. Next slide, please.
So basically what we did there is coming from a research background, it's basically what we tried to do is we tried to extrapolate three distinguishable characteristics from past events and apply those to those past events and apply those to both events that have happened all the way back in 2007 and events happening in 2020, including SolarWinds, and with current events as well that are happening in 2021 as well. So using that, we use these characteristics and applying to each one to see if they meet the criteria and they fit. And at that point, once we have these all categorized showing a clear pattern, we use and we extrapolate all the recommendations from these incidences, and we categorize those two recommendations into two categories. So what we do is we have one part, which is the higher level, more policy-wide recommendations that you need to utilize from a executive level decision-making process, and also characteristics as well that could be used more on a team-based or more your technical side as well for the teams that are operating actually with the devices that are being operated and used by these services as well. So using these two characteristics in the paper that we published earlier in the year as well, we have these two levels that could be used for both sides of the table here at this point, and show and demonstrate a clear pattern of a third-party supply chain compromise by either a third state or criminal actors as well. So that's what we were trying to do there as well. So let me go on to the next slide here. And basically, I'm going to list the three characteristics and tell you why we think these characteristics are a part of our paper and why they matter. So again, with any service that we're talking about here that can be exported again, the service will control multiple subsystems, networks, or products, and they require little to no interaction. Now, again, that's a benefit for users with onboarding that requires little to no interaction, but also it's a potential avenue for attackers as well, because again, with this little to no activation or use by the actual user, they won't realize that their system has been compromised by the very service that they don't even know they have. So that's the first characteristic. The second one is the system possesses an undisclosed, unpatched, or unknown opening that attackers can exploit for administrative control. Again, you see this with the SolarWinds incident as well. While that wasn't an actual CVE, again, that was an opening that the actors controlled to exploit the system that we referenced in rule number 1. And the last rule is the exploit opening can affect either the limited or total ability the subsystem it controls. So again, we're going to actually reference all the products or the systems that were featured in the paper, and that they have degrees of opening as well. Some can only affect a denial of service or a breaking of files, but anything else could be a total system compromise just by using that service that you thought was secure. So the next slide is, we're actually going to go over the characteristics of the attack. So actually, with this first one we're actually going to do is we're going to do all the way back to 2009 with HP OpenView. Now, again, HP OpenView is now a legacy system, and it was basically used by a variety of HP and non-HP affiliated devices. And it would control machines, servers, databases, and networking devices as well. So basically, they had two undisclosed vulnerabilities discovered in 2009. And it allowed remote attackers to execute malicious code via HTTP requests. And again, that has both the first and the second one covered of the rules that we covered beforehand as well. And using these, basically, what they could do is this could basically cause any kind of denial of service across anything by using these specifically crafted HTTP requests. And again, this affected a million devices at the time, but due to the size and scope, basically reporting and how the vulnerabilities were disclosed at the time back in 2009, it wasn't as widely featured as SolarWinds, but still was at the level just as high. And the next one is probably way more significant. I actually want to leverage John for this one, is the Wannacry in 2017. So John?
Thanks, Brad. Let me flip over here. So Wannacry really should have been one of the major warnings to the sector. So Wannacry basically started with the exploitation of vulnerabilities, significant Microsoft vulnerabilities known as the Eternal Blue vulnerabilities, which were allegedly stolen from the NSA and leaked on the dark web April of 2017 by a group known as I believe it was the Dark Shadow Group. They published it. It was still unclear at that time who these folks were. Were they in fact criminals? Were they nation state masquerading as criminals, then allowing some plausible deniability that it was not a nation state? What eventually happened is that a group claiming to be a criminal group developed the Wannacry ransomware strain that would exploit these vulnerabilities. And as they distributed this ransomware across the globe, it affected, unfortunately, healthcare most predominantly. And as the FBI subsequently determined and issued a bulletin later that fall, one of the most common vulnerabilities exploited related to Eternal Blue were found in medical devices, hence leading to massive impact to healthcare. In the national health system in the UK, over 35% of their hospitals were impacted by the Wannacry ransomware. This was the first time major healthcare organizations had to curtail operations, and that's putting it mildly. There were many canceled elective surgeries, critical patients being transferred, ambulances being diverted because of so many hospitals losing access to their electronic medical records. So the vulnerabilities that were found in the medical devices ultimately were the pathway into the system's main networks, which were then encrypted. Ransom demands were made at the time. Again, it was believed it was a criminal organization, but it spread rapidly. It was propagating, had worm-like capabilities. Subsequently, it was determined by the FBI and the US government that not only were medical devices exploited, the primary pathway in, but it was determined that this attack was promulgated by the North Korean government. The North Korean government was responsible for the development and deployment of the Wannacry ransomware, which struck globally, including major multinational corporations, resulting in billions of dollars of losses and, of course, risking patient care. The next attack, which was really kind of a spin-off, started in June 2017, and this is really the classic compromise of an update, a legitimate update from an organization called MEDOC, M-E-D-O-C. What was happening at that time, there were tremendous hostilities between the Russian government and Ukraine, which had, of course, separated from Russia. Lots of tensions between the two. And what happened was that the Russian Foreign Intelligence Service, the military intelligence service, the GRU, was able to corrupt a legitimate update from MEDOC, which is a tax software type service. And as that update was being downloaded, it infected many organizations which had a presence in the Ukraine. Now, it also impacted US healthcare. And how did that happen? Well, there's a company called Nuance Communications. Many of you in healthcare may be aware of them. They provide medical transcription and imaging for many, many organizations that rely on those transcribed medical records for billing purposes, again, documentation of care. So Nuance had a third-party vendor relationship in the Ukraine. That vendor was struck by the Wannacry ransomware, and before they realized it, in fact, they had transferred the Wannacry, the Petya NotPetya ransomware into Nuance's systems in the US. So Nuance goes down, and there is a disruptive ripple effect across thousands of providers in the US, hospitals, health systems, physician practices, and so forth, that depended on Nuance for their medical transcripts. One other factor here, which was critical here, there was no way to decrypt the Petya NotPetya ransomware. It was actually designed as destructive ransomware by the Russian government. So often when I speak to a group of hospital and health system leaders, I often ask, when I talk about this example, I ask, how many of you were impacted by the Petya NotPetya ransomware strain? I usually get a third of the room raise their hands. And then my next comment is, how many of you realize that you were collateral damage in a Russian military cyber attack against the Ukraine? And of course, almost none recognize that, but that is the type of strategic risk that may be present in our systems by these vulnerabilities, which are being exploited by foreign intelligence services, and then we may end up becoming collateral damage in a sense in these type of attacks. Again, this is really a discussion about risk and identifying that strategic risk through technical means, which is present in our organizations. So Brad, let me get that back to you for the next couple.
Thank you. Thank you. So last one we had is actually during the development of our paper, right as we were going through final editing. The newest thing that came out there was, of course, the Microsoft Exchange, and that was the biggest one, probably the start of 2021. There, you could say there, and that was basically hundreds of thousands of organizations globally were being at risk of being exploited with 4 zero-day vulnerabilities that were being used by Chinese nation-state actors, as well as other malicious cyber actors and criminals as well that were hoping to exploit this as well. And while again, so it's extremely serious, while it's a very noticeable part of our event, it doesn't meet the 3 characteristics for a couple of reasons. One, again, basically with Exchange, while it is a service that will help provide systems, it doesn't necessarily control systems like, again, is in the first characteristic as well. But it does, of course, have that opening and can be used to affect systems that is controlled by it. It doesn't reach that first characteristic. And so we actually had a lot of questions during the development of the paper as why are we going to add Microsoft Exchange? Because again, it was affecting hundreds of thousands of organizations worldwide. But again, the characteristics of supply chain compromise were very whittled down to their 3 base characteristics, and they need to apply to it. But back to it though, more about SolarWinds, where we're still feeling repercussions today in 2021. So actually, basically, again, centralized administrative software has unknown vulnerabilities, and there always will be a potential point of compromise for system and security administrators, okay? So that's the key characteristic and key line we wanted to bring out from this paper. And then the next line is, again, how can we stop this? So, or how can we respond? All right, so basically, how can we mitigate the next SolarWinds event? So again, we're going to cover from the technical recommendation standpoint is we need to continue to review and monitor common vulnerabilities and exposures, or the CVEs, along with their criticality to ensure appropriate priorities across your system. Again, this is monitoring CVEs as well, publications of this open source intelligence. Again, listening to, I know Microsoft always has their Patch Tuesday, where they reveal actionable 0 days, sometimes with proof of concept or sometimes without as well. And then once these CVs are out in the open and patches are available or workarounds are available, there should be immediate testing of the patch implementation where applicable in your own environment as well, okay? And then there needs to be continuous review of the CVE structure to make sure that you're properly having patch management across your entire system as well, and constantly enacting vulnerability scanning for your system as well to see if there's any leftover openings or unknown openings that you previously unpatched as well. Another technical recommendation as well is, again, is to utilize actionable threat intelligence. Again, we disseminate this a lot from the Health-ISAC Threat Operations Center here in Titusville, Florida, along with the American Hospital Association as well, and as other threat intelligence sources as well. We use quite a bit of threat intelligence sources here as well, third party, and there's also open source as well. Again, the SolarWinds report was covered nationwide with numerous coverage, even in national headlines like CNN as well. But everything from ZDNet and Bleeping Computer was covering almost on a day-to-day basis as well. And keeping that timeline of events with updating articles is a key point for where you need to figure out how to respond properly to these supply chain compromise events, okay? And the last one that I'll provide you all is reevaluating and identifying their key data dependencies. What kind of services are you having in your environment? And what kind of data are you transmitting or giving to these data dependencies when you're enacting their services in their environment? Again, at the same time, if you're utilizing SolarWinds and one of your key data processes and you're processing PII or any kind of thing like that as will result in a massive total data compromise in your environment, evaluate the necessity and need in your environment to have this data service in there as well, and evaluate if you can either internalize or need to translate the minimum amount of sensitive data that you need to have to give to them to have that process in your environment. And so from this point on here, again, we're going to cover another sector as well, which is going to be the strategic or decision level recommendations as well for your environment. And that's where I'm going to pass it over to John. Thank you.
Thanks, Brad. Appreciate that. And again, stepping back now, taking a more 30,000 or 10,000, even maybe 10,000 foot view, looking at the strategic management issues here. Many of our organizations have vendor risk management programs where you attempt to risk rank the vendors, business associates but very rarely do they go granular into identifying third-party software suppliers that are in their network. There's a couple other larger strategic characteristics of SolarWinds. For instance, it was ubiquitous. SolarWinds Orion platform was everywhere across all sectors, Fortune 500 companies, the government. So it was ubiquitous. It was trusted. There's a long history of being trusted in government and private sector, providing excellent service. And it was high privileged and had highly privileged software with high access. So think about what else is in your systems that is ubiquitous, highly trusted, has high privilege, high access, high visibility to all the data and to all of your networks. So just as you might do in a vendor risk management program, we would ask that you consider risk categorizing. First step is cataloging, as I just said. Catalog that environment if you can, of third-party software. And what we found in healthcare, especially medical devices, there is fourth-party software in there as well, and so forth, that a lot of this third-party software may include components from one of their business associates, fourth-party software, which might represent vulnerability. If you're interested in reading about that, I direct you to read about the Urgent 11 software update put out by the FDA last fall concerning software vulnerabilities in medical devices. So again, look at and then when you're dealing with software suppliers, just like with any other vendor, include them in the vendor risk management program, incorporate the cybersecurity view. The cybersecurity team may be able, the first team, to help identify these type of software which have that broad network access and privilege, and then would recommend a higher level of scrutiny to these to that type of software. Ensure again that there are the teams, the cybersecurity teams are involved in the scoping, purchase, and acquisition of new technologies before it's put into the system. Now, not every, as we've seen in these incidents, some of these attacks exploited zero-day vulnerabilities. There were no CVEs to document and make sure you're patched, or they were coming in through trusted updates. So therefore, as part of your risk management process, it's very important to understand what is supposed to be the normal behavior of this software. So looking for anomalies in what is supposed to be the legitimate normal behavior can help you detect potential risk when there's not even a CVE published, or again, might be a 0-day. Looking for that cybersecurity due diligence, extremely important, and to have a governance process in place to ensure that there is consistent cybersecurity review of the software supply chain and helping identify risk. Let me go to the next slide, please. Again, take a look at all the strategic and tactical issues we discussed in this paper. I really like the way Health-ISAC designed this paper, having strategic considerations with the technical and tactical. So this hopefully will apply to a very broad audience, and again, 2 complementary sections. And that's how we hope to be with the Health-ISAC. Complementary, not competitive, working for the greater good and helping defend the entire sector. So thanks for that. And I'm going to pass it over to Zach and see if we have time for questions.
Hey, thanks, John. Yeah, it looks like we got some time for questions, about 6 minutes left to the hour. You can either come off of your microphone and ask questions verbally, or place them here in the chat, and I'll be more than happy to moderate.
And you know, if there's no questions incoming, I actually have a question for Zach. I mean, excuse me, for Brad. So, and we didn't even rehearse this, but Brad, so my last point was talking about trying to detect anomalous behavior, right? Using heuristics, so forth, understanding what normal behavior is. Can you give us some like the technical things you would look for? Like, is it communication over unknown ports or IPs? What would you look for to, with your background, to detect anomalous behavior?
Absolutely. So actually, you're saying there, you're just looking at the IP ports there. You pretty much stated the answer in your question there. The key characteristic in actually notifying and identifying the SolarWinds attack was basically dissecting the traffic that was communicating between supposedly legitimate updates as well, and the communications from SolarWinds software back to their SolarWinds Orion or the HQ in Texas as well. The actual traffic that was involved in the SolarWinds attack was malicious, and so any kind of thing that was going to utilize any kind of Wireshark or network analyzation tools that can dissect individual packets and also deconstruct updates that are being sent to your software or specific ports, and analyzing it to verify either with a file check or any kind of verification method is the key way to identify supposedly legitimate updates and legitimate traffic that could potentially compromise your system. So those would be the two key ways.
Great. Thanks. Thanks, Brad. Appreciate that. And Zach, I'll turn back over to you to see if there's any more questions or other thoughts.
I have a question myself. So from a vendor risk perspective, and maybe you can help me here for what it is that that you usually consult and inform people of. But the first thing I noticed on SolarWinds page is that they had a big laundry list of who their customers were. Is that something you normally would advise against as threat actors look to enumerate and do their recon as far as who they might attack that may have third-party interfaces with different environments to possibly take those types of pages down?
Yeah, Zach, I think you answered the question as well. Absolutely. Why would you give away who's using your software? I mean, we know folks want to promote as part of their marketing that they have these big, trusted, well-known names. But again, they're also exposing their client list. And if there's a vulnerability, it's a roadmap. It's a roadmap for the adversaries to determine who their targets are and identify high-value targets there. So we would, strongly discourage that. Again, and especially if you have that central access, that high-level privilege, all that information, in my opinion, my personal opinion, should be highly confidential.
All right. Well, thank you, John. I appreciate you answering that question. We just had a question come into the chat channel. How were the Russians able to contaminate a legitimate update of the Ukrainian software? Is Windows 10 or Ubuntu at risk for something similar?
So I guess that'll be me on the technical side here. So at this point, it was actual compromisation of SolarWinds itself, the company that was based in Texas there at this point. If the utilization of any kind of software that's operated by them is effectively compromised due to the structure of how they deliver their software updates and services. Now, again, the actual update or any kind of traffic that was being passed away from their HQ in Texas appeared completely legitimate by your SolarWinds software installed in your computer. So it wouldn't really matter if it's Windows or Ubuntu at that point, as long as the software is installed on your computer is completely up to date and is communicating back with their supply chain HQ, like a lot of these softwares are. If they think it's completely legitimate because it's coming from HQ and they know it is, they're going to accept it whether it be malicious code or not. And so at this point at that point, once this central point of failure is compromised, now all machines that are connected to it that are processing these updates are therefore also compromised by proxy. So at that point, it wouldn't really matter if it's Ubuntu or Windows.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Brad. We are at the top of the hour. We have less than 60 seconds left. So let me go ahead and conclude today's presentation. First and foremost, I'd like to thank the many people that came to be a part of this event today. Thank you for taking time out of your busy day to come join us. And then not only that, let me also thank OASIS and the people behind the scenes that made today happen. Thank you for allowing us to be a part of it. And last but not least, thank you, John. Thank you, Brad, for putting this presentation together, which is something I think is very important throughout the whole security sector. And that is, if we can threatcast and ensure that we can make sure that this doesn't happen in our environment, the better off we are as far as reducing our security posture. So our attack surface, I apologize. So everybody, thank you very much and have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Stay safe.